That is the daily experience of the human mind. Most people think thoughts are temporary. They imagine ideas floating in and out like clouds, here for a second and then gone. But that is not how the mind really works. The mind does not just create thoughts. It stores them, strengthens them, and sends them back with more force. Every belief you repeat, every meaning you assign to events, every conclusion you settle on begins to echo. You are not simply thinking thoughts. Your thoughts are thinking you back. They shape your posture before you ever enter a room. They influence your tone before you open your mouth. They guide your expectations before events even unfold. The echo is not passive. It is active, steady, and persistent. Think about a simple belief someone forms about themselves. Maybe early in life they decide they are not very talented. At first, that thought seems small. But if they repeat it during hard moments, if they remember it during failure, if they use it to explain setbacks, it grows heavier. The echo gets louder. Over time, it stops feeling like a thought and starts feeling like reality. The mind does not just watch life happen. It explains life. And once it creates an explanation, it keeps replaying it. Those explanations settle in the background of your thinking. They repeat so often that they start to sound normal, even if they are limiting. The mind prefers what is familiar. If a belief has been repeated enough, it starts to feel true. Not because it has been tested, but because it has been heard so many times. Repetition builds certainty. Certainty builds strong belief. Strong belief drives action. When you wake up in the morning, you are not starting fresh. You are stepping back into yesterday's echoes. You begin your day already surrounded by the thoughts you have been rehearsing. If those thoughts are helpful, you move forward with confidence. If they are restrictive, you hesitate and hold back. The echo does not judge what you give it. It does not care whether a thought is helpful or harmful. It simply repeats what you have said most often inside your own mind. If you keep telling yourself that opportunities are rare, you will start to see proof of that everywhere. If you keep telling yourself that effort leads to improvement, you will begin to notice growth in your efforts. The room gives back what it hears. That is why two people can go through the same experience and walk away with different conclusions. One sees proof that they are limited. The other sees proof that they can improve. The event itself is the same. The difference is the echo inside each person. Over time, this repeated inner talk shapes identity. It affects what risks you are willing to take. It influences which conversations you avoid. It quietly shuts down certain dreams before you ever act on them. There is a loop happening all the time. A thought creates an interpretation. The interpretation gets repeated. The repetition becomes belief. The belief drives behavior. The behavior creates results. Then those results are explained using the same beliefs that started the loop. The cycle strengthens itself. Many people try to change their circumstances without changing their inner dialogue. They work on the outside while ignoring the inside. But the outside often reflects the inside. What shows up in your life is frequently connected to what has been repeated in your mind. There is no hidden enemy in this process. The mind is simply built to stay consistent. Once it settles on a pattern of thinking, it tries to keep that pattern. Familiar thoughts feel safe. Even limiting ones can feel comfortable because they are known. But comfort can slowly turn into a trap. If the main message echoing in your mind is that you are not good enough, you will interpret neutral events as proof of that. If the main message is that you can grow, you will use even mistakes as material for improvement. The echo makes everything louder. There is never complete silence in this mental room. Something is always being said. Even giving up is a message. Even apathy has a tone. The issue is not whether there is an echo. The issue is what that echo is strengthening. If someone believes they are always ignored, they will notice every time they are overlooked and ignore every time they are recognized. If someone believes effort pays off, they will see every small sign of progress and treat delays as temporary. In both cases, they are hearing their own voice coming back to them. This loop is easy to miss because it is quiet. There are no alarms, no clear signals. It builds slowly until one day it feels like fate. But what feels like fate is often just the long-term result of repeated thoughts. What you call destiny may simply be the collection of beliefs you have practiced for years. It is the total of the sentences you have allowed to repeat without question. It is the set of ideas you have heard so often that they now feel permanent. If you stopped today and listened closely, you would hear the main themes of your inner dialogue. You would recognize the phrases that show up when things get hard. You would notice the tone that appears when opportunity comes your way. Those are not random. They are established echoes. This system runs whether you pay attention to it or not. Becoming aware of it does not create it. It only makes it visible. And once you see it clearly, you cannot pretend it is harmless background noise. The room with perfect acoustics is already there. The real question is whether the echo inside it is building the life you want or strengthening the limits you have accepted. Every belief you let repeat becomes part of the structure. Every assumption you rehearse becomes part of the design. Over time, those repeated thoughts shape the space you live in mentally. You are not only living in the outside world, you are living inside the echo of your own explanations. Until you pay attention to what is being repeated, you will keep experiencing a louder version of whatever you have been saying to yourself all along. There is a structure to this mental room. It is not random noise bouncing around. It has a design. It has supports and patterns that decide what gets repeated, what gets ignored, and what gets emphasized. An internal echo chamber is built from repeated explanations. Not just single thoughts, but interpretations that are used over and over until they become automatic. Something happens. You explain it to yourself. That explanation is stored. When something similar happens again, your mind pulls out the old explanation and uses it instead of looking at the event with fresh eyes. Repetition becomes a shortcut. Over time, repeated explanations turn into default stories. A default story is the version of events you tell yourself without thinking about it. It shows up before you have time to reason carefully. It is the quiet voice that labels what is happening as it happens. If a business deal falls through, one person's default story might say, "This is part of learning." Another's might say, "I am not meant for this." The event is the same. The story is different. The story that gets repeated most often becomes the main lens for everything that follows. These default stories do more than sit in the background. They act like filters. Information that fits the story is noticed and remembered. Information that challenges it is brushed aside or forgotten. The chamber prefers what matches the existing pattern. Attention plays a key role. You tend to see what you expect to see. If your story says people are supportive, you will notice small signs of encouragement. If your story says people do not care, you will focus on moments where no one responds. The same actions can be interpreted in different ways depending on the story you already believe. Memory works the same way. The mind does not store every experience equally. It gives more weight to moments that match the main story. If you believe you are strong, you will remember times you pushed through difficulty. If you believe you are weak, You will remember failures more clearly than recoveries. Memory organizes itself around the dominant belief. Emotion makes this process stronger. When a thought carries strong feeling, it sticks. It becomes easier to recall. It returns quickly in similar situations. Emotion acts like glue, making certain interpretations hold firm while others fade away. All of this happens automatically. The mind is not trying to trick you. It is trying to stay organized. A consistent story is easier to manage than constant reevaluation. Once a pattern is formed, it takes less effort to keep repeating it than to question it every time. The key point is simple. The mind cares more about consistency than perfect accuracy. It prefers a steady story over a fully tested one. If new information clashes with the story, tension appears. To reduce that tension, the mind often changes how the new information is interpreted instead of changing the old belief. Imagine someone who believes they are always underestimated. When they receive praise, they may assume it is just politeness. The compliment is reshaped to fit the belief. The original story stays intact. The echo continues. This explains how people can live in very different mental worlds while sharing the same physical space. Each person filters experience through their own internal design. Each person's chamber highlights certain details and lowers the volume on others. The structure feeds itself. Default stories shape attention. Attention selects matching evidence. That evidence strengthens the story. A stronger story shapes future interpretations. The cycle becomes smoother and faster over time. Eventually, what began as a small guess turns into a firm belief. What started as a cautious thought becomes an unquestioned fact. The echo becomes familiar, and familiar things are rarely challenged. This system developed to keep things stable. Sudden changes in interpretation feel unsettling. The mind prefers what it already knows, even if what it knows is limiting. Notice how fast the mind can react to a setback. If you have often told yourself you are not capable, one mistake can instantly confirm that belief. The reaction feels certain and immediate. But the certainty comes from repetition, not careful analysis. The structure of this mental chamber is built slowly through daily explanations. Each time you label an experience in the same way, you strengthen the framework. Each time you repeat the same conclusion, you reinforce the walls. After a while, the structure feels invisible. You do not see the framework anymore. You just experience the filtered result. You assume your perception is complete without realizing it has already passed through layers of interpretation. Examining this structure takes effort. It means pausing before accepting the automatic story. It means asking whether your explanation is the only possible one, or simply the most familiar one. It requires awareness of how attention, memory, and emotion work together to protect the existing pattern. When you understand that the mind favors consistency over truth, you gain distance from your own certainty. You begin to see that strong conviction does not always mean something is correct. A belief repeated often enough can feel undeniable while still being incomplete. The chamber itself is not harmful. It helps you move through life efficiently. It saves mental energy. But efficiency without reflection can lock in mistakes. A structure built for stability can become rigid. If certain beliefs feel hard to change, it is because they are supported by this whole system. They are connected to many reinforcing interpretations. Changing them requires more than replacing a single thought. It requires reshaping part of the structure. Understanding how the chamber works does not destroy it, but it makes it visible. You start to see how stories are formed, how they are protected, and how they grow stronger. Awareness turns automatic repetition into conscious choice. The internal echo chamber is a system made of repeated explanations, selective attention, shaped memory, and emotion-backed belief. It is built for consistency. It amplifies what it has already heard. Once you see that, you realize that what feels unavoidable may simply be well practiced. What feels permanent may simply be well supported. The structure is strong, but it is not fixed forever. The mind prefers coherence over perfect truth. When you understand that, you stop treating your main stories as final answers. You begin to see them as built structures that can be examined, adjusted, and, if necessary, rebuilt. Thought by itself does not decide how strong an echo becomes. Emotion decides how loud it is. If you speak calmly in a large empty hall, the sound comes back softly. If you shout with force, the echo returns louder and sharper. The mind works in a similar way. Emotion is not just a reaction to a thought. It acts like an amplifier. It decides which ideas stand out and which fade away. A neutral thought may pass through your mind once or twice and then disappear. A thought filled with fear, anger, or excitement will repeat more strongly. Take fear as an example. Fear narrows your focus. It makes you alert to danger. When a thought carries fear, the mind treats it as important. It gives it priority. The echo becomes louder because the emotional signal says, pay attention. A small uncertainty can grow into a major threat once fear increases its volume. Resentment works the same way. If someone keeps replaying a moment they believe was unfair, and they feel strong anger each time, the story becomes more solid. The mind does not only replay what happened, it replays the feeling tied to it. That feeling strengthens the memory and makes it easier to repeat again. The echo becomes more convincing. Gratitude follows the same pattern. When appreciation is deeply felt, it makes positive details stand out. The mind starts looking for more reasons to keep that feeling alive. Small wins feel important. Minor progress feels meaningful. The echo of gratitude encourages you to notice more good experiences. Emotion does not care whether a thought is helpful or harmful. It strengthens whatever it touches. A hopeful belief felt strongly can drive action. A negative belief felt with frustration can turn into a powerful obstacle. And the emotional charge determines how much space a thought takes up in your mind. The stronger the feeling, the more often the thought returns. Repetition carves the path. Emotion locks it in place. Together, they make the idea feel permanent. Without emotion, repetition may still work, but it takes longer. With emotion, the process speeds up. This is why intense moments can shape someone so deeply. One highly emotional event can influence a person's self-image more than many calm experiences. The feeling attached to the event gives it weight. That weight helps it last. If someone experiences failure and connects it with embarrassment, the emotional mark strengthens the memory. Later, when a similar situation appears, the same feeling can return quickly, even before anything has gone wrong. The mind remembers not only the event, but the emotion tied to it. Emotion acts like a flag that says, this matters. Once flagged, the thought is easier to recall and more likely to repeat. The mind does not separate positive intensity from negative intensity. It amplifies both in the same way. There is also a link between expectation and emotion. If someone constantly expects problems and feels anxious about them, that anxiety prepares the mind to find proof. Even neutral results may be interpreted as signs of trouble. The echo feeds itself. Emotion controls volume. Repetition controls how long something stays. A thought repeated quietly may remain in the background. A thought repeated with strong emotion can move to the center of your thinking. It can shape your perception before you even pause to think carefully. This explains why new ways of thinking can feel weak at first. Someone may try to replace an old belief, but the new belief lacks emotional support. It feels less convincing than the old one, which has been strengthened by years of strong feeling. The old echo sounds firm, the new one sounds uncertain. Emotion is not the enemy. It is a tool. It has power. It can be guided. But if it is not managed, it will strengthen whatever thought is easiest to reach. When enthusiasm supports effort, the work feels worthwhile. When discouragement supports effort, the same work feels heavy. The feeling changes the experience, and that experience affects whether you continue. Louder thoughts get more attention. Quieter thoughts are pushed aside. If pessimism carries strong emotion in your mind, negative interpretations will stand out more than hopeful ones. The loudest echo wins. This is why emotional discipline matters. It does not mean ignoring feelings. It means understanding that feelings reinforce beliefs. Repeated emotional responses build mental structure. If you begin to approach challenges with curiosity instead of fear, you change the emotional tone. Over time, uncertainty can start to feel interesting rather than threatening. The shift in feeling changes what gets repeated. Beliefs rarely become strong because of logic alone. They become strong because they have been felt again and again. People hold tightly to ideas not just because they have thought them through, but because they have experienced them with intensity. An echo grows through both repetition and strength of feeling. A thought said casually may fade. A thought declared with passion may stay. Emotion signals importance, and importance invites repetition. When you look at your own common thoughts, notice the feelings connected to them. Does discouragement show up when you face difficulty? Does confidence appear when you see opportunity? The emotion reveals which ideas have been amplified the most. Emotion is the volume control of your mental space. It decides which thoughts are clear and which are barely heard. It shapes the environment in which your interpretations form. If you want to change what dominates your thinking, you must look at both the thought and the feeling behind it. Repetition builds the path. Emotion strengthens it. A thought that is repeated often and felt deeply becomes central. Emotion sets the volume. Repetition sets the duration. Together, they turn simple ideas into strong beliefs. And once those beliefs are formed, they begin guiding behavior long before careful reasoning steps in. There comes a time when the echo in your mind stops sounding like simple commentary. It starts to sound like who you are. What began as an explanation becomes a label. What began as a reaction turns into a definition. The chamber does not just repeat thoughts about your experiences. It slowly shapes the way you describe yourself. Someone might say, "I'm bad at business." Another might say, "I'm not disciplined." Another, "I'm always overlooked." These are not just comments about single events. They are conclusions built from repeated interpretations. They're echoes that have been repeated so often they now feel solid. Identity statements are hardened echoes from the past. They are built from selected memories, strong emotions, and repeated self-talk. Once they form, they feel objective. They feel permanent. They feel like facts. It is important to separate behavior from identity. Behavior changes. It can shift from day to day. A person can be disciplined in one area and inconsistent in another. Someone can succeed in one effort and struggle in the next. Behavior moves. It is not fixed. Identity feels stable because it has been repeated many times. The statement, "I am not disciplined," may have started with a few missed commitments. Each time a commitment was missed, it was explained in the same way. That explanation was repeated. The repetition formed a story. The story eventually turned into identity. Once identity forms, it strongly affects perception. If you believe you are not disciplined, you will notice every slip quickly. You will ignore small wins and focus on delays. The identity guides what you pay attention to. Identity also shapes expectations. If you believe you are always overlooked, you may enter conversations with hesitation. Your voice may sound uncertain. You may hold back slightly. These actions are not random. They match the identity you have practiced. What is striking about identity is that it often feels discovered instead of built. People talk about finding themselves as if identity was always there. But much of what feels natural has been assembled slowly through repeated interpretation. Early experiences can shape this process. A few struggles with math might lead to the thought, I'm not good with numbers. If that thought keeps getting repeated and supported by future difficulty, it can become a firm identity. Years later, that person may avoid financial tasks, not because they cannot handle them, but because they believe they cannot. Identity is belief that has been rehearsed. It feels convincing, not because it has been tested carefully, but because it has been said many times. Each time you describe yourself the same way, you strengthen the echo. There is also comfort in a steady identity. Even a limiting one can feel safe. If you define yourself as someone who avoids risk, you do not have to face the discomfort of bold action. The identity makes decisions simpler. It gives you a script to follow. But that simplicity can hide limitation. When identity becomes rigid, it closes doors. A person who says, I'm not creative, may never try to create. A person who says, I'm not leadership material, may never accept responsibility that could prove otherwise. The difference between behavior and identity is critical. Behavior describes what you did. Identity describes who you think you are. Trouble begins when a temporary action becomes a permanent label. If someone says, I failed at this, they are describing behavior. If they say, I am a failure, they are defining identity. The words may seem close, but the impact is very different. Identity shapes decisions. If you see yourself as capable, you view challenges as chances to grow. If you see yourself as limited, you view challenges as threats. The identity shapes the reaction before careful thinking even begins. Over time, the echo becomes so familiar that new interpretations feel strange. If you have repeated, I lack discipline for years, a new thought like, I can build discipline may feel forced. The old echo sounds stronger because it has history. Identity is not fixed by nature. It is made steady through repetition. If you change the story you repeat often enough, the identity will slowly shift. But without new repetition, the old echo will keep defining you. Many people try to change actions without changing identity. They attempt new habits while still saying, this isn't who I am. The result is conflict. The behavior may improve for a while, but the old identity pulls thinking back to familiar ground. When the echo becomes your identity, it affects posture, tone, and goals. It influences what you believe is possible. It shapes how long you keep trying after failure. It guides what you accept and what you pursue. Identity often feels permanent simply because it has lasted a long time. But long-lasting does not mean unchangeable. It only means well-practiced. You must be careful with the sentences you repeat about yourself. Every repetition strengthens the foundation. Every rehearsal adds weight to the definition. If you believe you are undisciplined, you will look for proof of that belief. If you believe you are adaptable, you will look for examples of flexibility. Identity directs attention. Identity is practiced belief. It feels real because it has been repeated. It feels true because it has been rehearsed. Yet it is still built from layers of interpretation over time. When you realize that identity is not a fixed trait, but a reinforced story, you gain distance from it. You begin to see that who you are may simply be the echo of what you have told yourself most often. And once you see it as an echo, you understand that it can be reshaped. What happens in your mind does not stay there. The echo inside does not stop at belief. It shows up in how you move, how you speak, when you act, and what you choose. Your inner dialogue quietly shapes your outer results. Your thoughts affect your posture before you even notice. Someone who believes they are capable stands differently than someone who believes they are not. Their shoulders are set differently. Their eye contact changes. Their pace shifts. These changes are not planned. They flow naturally from what they believe. Tone changes too. A person who expects rejection sounds different from someone who expects respect. The words might be the same, but the delivery is not. A slight hesitation or steady confidence can change how a message is received. Belief also affects timing. Someone who expects opportunity speaks up quickly and moves with decision. Someone who expects to be dismissed may pause, soften their point, or hold back. Others may read that hesitation as uncertainty, which then supports the original belief. Risk is shaped by the echo as well. If your mind repeats messages of inadequacy, risk feels threatening. If your mind repeats messages of growth and resilience, risk feels manageable. The same opportunity can look dangerous or promising depending on the story behind it. The pattern is simple but powerful. Thought leads to behavior. Behavior leads to reaction. Reaction strengthens the original thought. Picture a person who believes they are often ignored. They enter a conversation quietly. They speak with low energy. Others respond with limited engagement. That response appears to confirm the belief. The echo becomes stronger. Now picture someone who believes their effort matters. They speak clearly and directly. Others respond with attention. The reaction supports the belief. The internal story grows firmer. Your surroundings often reflect your internal dialogue. Not because thoughts magically control the world, but because thoughts shape behavior. Behavior invites response. The mirror reflects posture, tone, and expectation. Many people blame results only on circumstance. They overlook how mindset affects action and how action affects response. They assume events happen independently of belief, but belief guides behavior, and behavior influences outcomes. If someone expects difficulty, they may approach a task with tension. That tension can reduce clarity. Reduced clarity can create problems. Those problems then seem to confirm the expectation. The cycle continues. There is no mystery in this. It is sequence. Thought shapes behavior. Behavior shapes interaction. Interaction shapes outcome. Outcome is explained through the original belief. The internal chamber does not sit quietly. It shows itself in small choices. It appears in how you respond. It becomes visible in patterns over time. Even subtle beliefs affect interaction. If you assume goodwill, you are more likely to interpret unclear comments as neutral. If you assume hostility, you may read the same comments as negative. Your reaction changes. The response you receive changes. As this pattern repeats, it feels like proof. The world seems to confirm your belief again and again, but the repetition may come from consistent behavior, driven by consistent thought. The inner echo shapes the outer script. The script then feeds back into the mind as evidence. The more often this loop runs, the more convincing it feels. You cannot control every reaction from others, but you can notice how your internal story shapes your part in each interaction. A mirror does not create an image. It reflects what stands in front of it. If your inner voice focuses on limits, your behavior may signal caution. If your inner voice focuses on possibility, your behavior may signal openness. Others respond to those signals. This loop works in both directions. Positive belief can lead to reinforcing results. Limiting belief can do the same. The environment often reflects the strongest internal message. Understanding this does not change everything at once, but it shifts responsibility. It shows that the echo inside is not just mental. It shows up in conduct. The external mirror proves that repeated thoughts do not stay hidden. They influence your presence. They affect your choices. They shape how people react to you. When you notice patterns in your outcomes, look beyond circumstance. Ask how your internal narrative may be guiding your behavior. Consider the ways you might be contributing without realizing it. Thought becomes behavior. Behavior brings reaction. Reaction strengthens thought. This cycle keeps beliefs in place. And until the internal echo is examined, the external mirror will keep showing the same familiar picture. You cannot stop thinking. You cannot make the mind completely silent. The mind is built to interpret, judge, and replay events. Trying to eliminate all thoughts is unrealistic and unnecessary. What you can do is manage them. What you can control is which thoughts you repeat. Problems arise when the mind keeps amplifying interpretations without questioning them. Discipline begins when you decide which interpretations deserve to be repeated. The key is not whether thoughts appear. The key is which ones you allow to echo. Most internal stories run automatically. Something goes wrong, and a familiar explanation shows up immediately. A delay happens, and the same old conclusion appears. These reactions feel quick and convincing. But quick does not mean correct. Managing repetition starts with interruption. When an automatic thought appears, you pause. You do not deny it or push it away. You pause. That pause creates space between what happened and what you decide it means. In that space, you have a choice. Forcing thoughts away is not discipline. Suppression tries to silence them by ignoring or fighting them. Often, suppressed thoughts return even stronger because they were never examined. They were only resisted. Redirection is different. Redirection admits the thought exists but changes the frame around it. It does not pretend the problem is not real. It changes the meaning attached to it. If the automatic thought says, "This always happens to me," redirection might say, "This is one event, and I can respond differently." If the thought says, "I am not capable," redirection might answer, "I am still developing skill." The situation stays the same. The interpretation shifts. Selective reinforcement means choosing which thoughts you repeat. Every time you replay an idea, you strengthen it. If you repeat a constructive explanation on purpose, you begin to change the main tone of your thinking. Limiting thoughts will still appear. They come from habit and memory. But whether they stay depends on repetition. A thought that is noticed and redirected loses strength. A thought that is rehearsed gains power. You may not be able to stop echoes entirely, but you can decide what you keep repeating. What you practice becomes familiar. What becomes familiar feels believable. What feels believable influences behavior. This requires paying attention to your internal language. Notice how you explain events to yourself. Notice the tone you use. Ask whether your interpretation opens possibility or shuts it down. The words you repeat quietly shape your future responses. Distortion happens when repetition is automatic and unchecked. Discipline happens when repetition is chosen. When you start observing your own thoughts, you begin to see patterns that once felt invisible. Awareness exposes repetition. Repetition reveals influence. Changing your dominant narrative takes patience. A new interpretation may feel weak at first because it has not been repeated much. The old story feels stronger simply because it has history. The new one feels uncertain because it is new. But familiarity does not prove truth. It only proves repetition. If you repeat a new constructive interpretation consistently, it will grow stronger. The mind responds to what it hears most often. This does not mean ignoring difficulty. It means choosing an explanation that encourages progress instead of surrender. It means framing setbacks in a way that supports effort. When you change your interpretation, you also change your emotional tone. When emotion shifts, repetition becomes easier. Over time, positive frames gain strength and begin to compete with older patterns. The mind does not naturally choose the most helpful explanation. It chooses the most familiar one. Discipline steps in to prevent familiarity from deciding your future. Selective reinforcement requires consistency. One new thought will not erase years of repetition. But steady redirection weakens the old pattern, bit by bit. Each pause reduces automatic control. Each deliberate repetition strengthens the new direction. You do not have to eliminate doubt. You simply have to stop rehearsing it automatically. When a limiting thought appears, notice it, question it, and decide whether it deserves to be repeated. That decision determines what grows louder. The mind will always contain noise. The goal is not silence. The goal is a tone that supports action instead of blocking it. Distortion allows old stories to play without question. Discipline introduces awareness, choice, and intentional repetition. That difference shapes growth. You cannot stop thoughts from entering your mind, but you can stop them from settling in permanently. You can prevent them from becoming dominant through repeated rehearsal. Each time you repeat a constructive interpretation on purpose, you shift the mental atmosphere slightly. Small shifts add up. Over time, the overall tone changes. The echoes begin to encourage rather than restrict. You may not be able to stop echoes, but you can choose which ones you practice. What you choose to repeat consistently determines whether your thinking becomes distorted or disciplined. Understanding how the chamber works is one thing. Changing it is another. Awareness by itself does not rebuild anything. If the structure was built through repetition, it must be rebuilt the same way. The process is steady, intentional, and repeated over time. The first step is identification. You need to notice the thoughts that return often. Not random worries, but the phrases that show up under pressure. The explanations that appear after setbacks. These are your main echoes. Identification requires observation without criticism. Simply listen to how you speak to yourself. Notice what you say after something goes wrong. Pay attention to repeated patterns. Just becoming aware of them starts to weaken their automatic power. The second step is to look at emotional intensity. Which thoughts carry the strongest feelings? The ones that bring anxiety, frustration, anger, or confidence are usually the most dominant. Strong emotion signals which stories have been amplified the most. Next, examine the evidence behind those stories. Many long-held beliefs are based on only a few experiences. A small number of events may have been turned into a broad conclusion. Ask yourself whether the evidence is complete or selective. Then question the interpretation. If something failed, was it proof that you cannot succeed, or was it a sign that something needs adjustment? If a conversation went badly, was it rejection, or was it misunderstanding? Questioning does not deny facts. It widens the view. The next step is deliberate framing. Replace automatic explanations with chosen ones. This does not mean unrealistic positivity. It means choosing interpretations that are accurate and constructive. Difficulty can be seen as information. Delay can be seen as adjustment instead of defeat. Replacement must be consistent. One new thought will not erase years of repetition. Each time the old pattern appears, redirect it. Each time the familiar phrase returns, introduce the new frame. Rehearsal is necessary. Anything feels natural after enough repetition. Limiting beliefs feel convincing because they have been practiced for years. New beliefs feel strange because they have not. That discomfort is temporary. Consistency builds strength inside the mind. When a new interpretation is repeated often, it grows stronger. When it is supported by action and emotion, it becomes stable. Eventually, it begins to show up automatically. Expect resistance. Old patterns will try to return. They have history behind them. The goal is not to remove them instantly, but to gradually replace them. Every redirection weakens the old structure slightly. This takes patience. The chamber was built over time. It will be rebuilt the same way. Slow, steady repetition reshapes the internal design. As the main story changes, small shifts begin to appear. Decisions feel clearer. Emotional reactions become steadier. Confidence increases, not because the world has changed, but because interpretation has changed. The internal environment starts working with you instead of against you. Growth happens gradually. Small changes in thought lead to small changes in behavior. Small changes in behavior lead to modest improvements in results. Those improvements support the new story. The cycle begins to favor progress. Constructive thinking is not blind optimism. It is careful framing. It does not ignore obstacles. It sees them as chances to improve skills. Over time, this way of thinking affects how you see risk, set standards, and recognize opportunity. When your inner voice begins to support confidence instead of doubt, your approach changes. You assess risk calmly instead of avoiding it automatically. You raise standards because you expect improvement. You notice opportunity because you are not focused only on limits. Compounding comes from many small decisions. Each choice may seem minor, but over months and years, they shift direction. The inner change comes first. The outer results follow. New ways of thinking may feel artificial at first. That is because they are new, not because they are wrong. Familiarity has been confused with truth. As repetition increases, the new story begins to feel natural. Conviction grows with practice. Eventually, the chamber begins to repeat the new narrative on its own. What once required effort becomes normal. The inner voice aligns with growth. The structure has been rebuilt. Small internal shifts add up. A better interpretation changes emotional tone. A better tone changes behavior. Better behavior changes results. Results support the new narrative. Over time, the effect becomes clear. Rebuilding the chamber is not dramatic. It is methodical. It is repeated choice. It is disciplined framing. It is patient reshaping of identity. The long-term impact is significant. Decisions become faster because doubt is no longer dominant. Standards rise because expectation has changed. Opportunity becomes easier to see because attention has been retrained. The world may look different, not because it has changed, but because perception has. The mirror reflects a new posture and a new tone. The chamber will always produce echoes. The difference is which ones are repeated most often. When deliberate framing replaces automatic distortion, the main narrative becomes constructive. Over time, repetition works in your favor. Small internal adjustments, repeated consistently, lead to real change. The structure shifts, the tone shifts, and eventually the outcomes shift with them. Return to the room with perfect acoustics. Stand in the center and listen closely. The walls are not empty. They are carrying something. They are sending back phrases that have been spoken many times, sometimes casually, sometimes with strong emotion, sometimes accepted from others without question. Every day, something enters that room. A comment from someone else, a memory from the past, a conclusion formed during frustration. Some of these ideas are tested, many are not. The ones that are never questioned often last the longest because they were never challenged. What thought has been echoing the longest? Not the one you say once in a while, the one that appears automatically during difficulty, the one that shows up without effort. That thought has been repeated often. It feels powerful because it has gone unopposed. Is it accurate? Accuracy requires review. Many long-standing thoughts were formed when your understanding was limited. A setback in childhood became a lasting label. One rejection became a rule. The echo started before you had enough experience to see the full picture. Is it useful? Even if it contains some truth, does repeating it help you grow? A thought can be partly correct and still harmful if it discourages action. The chamber does not judge usefulness. It repeats what it hears most. Is it inherited? Some beliefs were adopted, not created. Words from authority figures, casual remarks from peers, cultural ideas about what is possible or impossible. These may have entered years ago. After enough repetition, they began to feel like your own voice. Now imagine a different sentence being repeated daily. If the dominant thought shifted from "I can't" to "I can improve," from blame to responsibility, from fear to preparation, what would change? How would your posture change? How would your tone change? How would your decisions change? Your life is not shaped by one passing thought. It is shaped by what you repeat consistently. One positive idea cannot overcome years of repeated doubt. One moment of motivation cannot outweigh constant negative rehearsal. What you feed the chamber matters. Every interpretation you replay strengthens a pattern. Every story you repeat adds to your sense of identity. Every emotionally charged conclusion becomes part of the structure. You cannot stop internal speech. Silence is not the answer. Choice is. Discipline is. The chamber responds to repetition, not good intentions alone. Think about deliberate repetition. If you consistently rehearse responsibility instead of blame, opportunity instead of scarcity, preparation instead of fear, the tone inside changes. As the tone changes, behavior shifts. As behavior shifts, results begin to follow. There will always be outside noise. Opinions, circumstances, and uncertainty will not disappear. But the strongest daily influence on your actions is the echo inside. It shapes how you respond before you are aware of it. Look at what you have repeated most often. Is it strengthening you or holding you back? Is it pushing you forward or keeping you comfortable? The chamber does not choose. It reflects what it receives most. If you change what you feed it, you change what it sends back. If you repeat constructive ideas more often, they grow stronger. If you stop repeating limiting ones, they slowly weaken. The outer world will often match the inner tone. The pattern stays the same. Thought shapes behavior. Behavior shapes reaction. Reaction reinforces thought. Change the first step, and the cycle begins to change. You are not defined by a single failure. You are defined by the sentence you repeat after it. You are not restricted by one hard moment. You are restricted by the meaning you keep attaching to it. The chamber will keep echoing. What you think tonight will influence tomorrow. What you conclude today will shape next week's choices. What you repeat now will return later, louder and more certain. Stand in that room and listen. The sound you hear is not fate. It is practice. It is repeated interpretation made familiar through use. Your life does not reflect what you think once. It reflects what you allow to echo again and again. There is one final truth to face clearly. The chamber never shuts down. It does not rest when you are tired. It does not pause when you feel discouraged. It keeps repeating whatever has been practiced most often. If the echo inside has been hesitation, hesitation will feel normal. If the echo has been preparation, preparation will feel normal. What feels natural is usually not random. It has been practiced. Many people wait for a dramatic breakthrough. They hope for one powerful moment that will erase doubt and create instant confidence. But change in this chamber does not come from one bold statement. It comes from steady repetition. The echo is shaped every day. Small interpretations add up quietly. A minor inconvenience can be labeled as proof that life is unfair, or as a lesson in patience. A delay can be called failure, or it can be seen as adjustment. The label matters because repetition follows it. What you repeat often becomes your standard. Standards are not declared loudly. They become assumed. If the chamber repeats responsibility, you respond to problems with effort. If it repeats excuses, you respond differently. The difference may seem small at first, but over time it becomes significant. Look at what you have grown used to. If frustration has been repeated often, it will feel justified. If calm thinking has been repeated often, that will feel natural instead. Familiarity does not mean something is required. It means it has been practiced. The chamber does not judge truth. It strengthens what it hears most often. Your responsibility is not to remove every negative thought. It is to stop repeating it so frequently that it becomes dominant. Success in any area comes from consistency, not from occasional effort. The same rule applies to thinking. A few positive thoughts cannot overcome constant repetition of limitation. The balance of repetition determines the outcome. If you want the echo to change, the input must change. Not once, not briefly, but consistently. Each day brings moments where you interpret what happens. Each moment is a chance to reinforce an old story or build a new one. You must choose which voice becomes stronger. The voice of resignation or the voice of responsibility. The voice of scarcity or the voice of resourcefulness. The chamber will amplify whichever one you repeat most. Old patterns will resist change. They feel comfortable because they are familiar. But familiarity is habit, not strength. Habit can be replaced by practicing something different. As new interpretations are repeated, they gain credibility. As they gain credibility, hesitation decreases. With less hesitation, action becomes clearer. Clear action leads to better results. Those results then support the new narrative. You are not just listening to the chamber, you are shaping it. Every conclusion you repeat adds to its structure. Every strong emotion attached to a thought makes it more solid. You can live without examining the echo, letting it guide you without awareness. Or you can step back, listen carefully, and decide whether the sound matches the life you want to build. Life does not change because of one inspiring thought. It changes because of repeated interpretation. What you say to yourself in private affects what you attempt in public. What you rehearse quietly shapes what you accept openly. Selective repetition is not dramatic. It is steady and intentional. It means guarding your internal space the way you would guard something valuable. When you change what is amplified, you change what feels true. When what feels true changes, your choices change. When your choices change consistently, your direction changes. The chamber will repeat tomorrow what you practiced today. It will repeat next year what you practiced this month. The process is quiet, but it does not stop. Listen to what you have been giving the most volume. Decide whether it deserves to continue. Strengthen what builds you. Stop repeating what weakens you. Over time, the tone shifts. The main narrative changes. The echo that once held you back can begin to push you forward. The results in your life will reflect not a single thought, but the pattern you practiced. Your future is not shaped by one burst of inspiration. It is shaped by steady rehearsal. What you allow to echo most often will guide the direction of your days.